Hi again then guys, and welcome to another installment of Rivals on Gran Turismo 6, and this particular Rivals matchup is between four top tier Euro spec super saloons. Now we will not be including stuff like the newer shape Dodge Charger or SRT Charger in this selection. This is, as I said, for the Euro saloons, the big expensive luxury saloons of Britain, Germany, etc. Now this particular shootout is between four vehicles: the BMW M5, the Mercedes E55, the Audi RS6 and the Jaguar XFR. They're all powerful, fast, heavy and expensive. So the question is, which one's the best, at least on paper? But also, which one of them in fully tuned form is the quickest around a track? Well, let's find out. First up we have the BMW E60 series M5, and for the sake of this test I'm using the premium version, which is the better of the two. Now this car is widely loved. In fact, it's arguably even more loved than its replacement, which is funny how sometimes cars do that. The cars set such a high bar that cars that replace them or come after them or carry on the lineage of the model line just don't really live up to it. And in the case of the M5, that seems to be the case with this particular model. Now it's powered by, of course, a 5-litre V10 engine, 7-speed gearbox. It was heralded as the fastest saloon car in the world for a short time at 205 miles per hour de-restricted, and it's an incredible performance machine. The fact that you can buy these, at least here in the UK, for about £17,000 used is pretty ridiculous considering how quick it is. Or at least those were the prices last time I checked. Now, as far as what it can do on Gran Turismo, well, as you can see from the lap time, it's pretty quick. Now, we don't have any comparison until we get into the other three vehicles, but you'll see that this is a seriously quick vehicle. In fact, straight off the bat, this is the quickest of the four cars, despite not being the most powerful. Interestingly, the M5 isn't really an overly strong car compared to some in terms of just numbers. But what's great about it is that, like the M3, the M4 and some others, it converts the numbers that it's given into really good actual on-track performance. The handling, I would say, on the M5 is easily the best of these four cars. It handles itself remarkably well, and that's not just because it's the premium. Even though the premium does make it feel even better, even the non-premium is still a fantastic car. What, though, about the Audi RS6? Well, the RS6 offers a distinctly dated feel to a super saloon. It has some definite advantages. It's the only car of the four with all-wheel drive, and as such, especially in fully tuned form, none of the other cars here can keep up with it for sheer launch off the line. Plus, when you take it into a rally scenario, it will easily do away with the other three cars because it's just got more traction. In those circumstances, it's a great car, but if you take it out of those relatively limited scenarios where the all-wheel drive really gives you that advantage, it doesn't really feel that great compared to the other three. Now, is it a bad car? No, certainly not. It's a great car, it's one of the more affordable models here, but the all-wheel drive feels kind of unnecessary, to be frank, and around the track it actually ends up making it feel a little too heavy and cumbersome. At least here on the Nürburgring GP course. It's still a fantastic car, but it just feels like a bit of overkill. Next up now we have the Jaguar XFR. This is kind of a strange car on Gran Turismo because it's one of the very few newer cars to actually not be a premium despite being a newer model on the game. It still has Gran Turismo 4 style graphics, which is really strange and disappointing given how new the car is. Now, as far as what it's capable of, it more than makes up for the lack of an interior, because this is powerful, it's fast, and although it is very heavy and expensive, it really is worth it. If you're looking for something that's a great alternative to the likes of the Audi RS6, the Mercedes E55, etc., the XFR really does offer that. It's got huge top speed, even with the stock gearbox, and with 800 horsepower on tap, well, of course, it's going to go like stink. As far as its cornering performance goes, though, it's not as great. Now, it's not a bad car around corners, and it certainly doesn't feel as cumbersome as the RS6, but it definitely isn't as sharp as, for instance, the M5, and the handling is, I would say, somewhere between the E55 from Mercedes and the RS6. It's not necessarily fantastic, but it's not necessarily bad either. The handling is, I would say, passable. The straight line performance, on the other hand, is fantastic. And finally, we have, last but definitely not least, the Mercedes E55 AMG. This car is powerful, it's got an insane amount of torque, and although it is extremely heavy, not quite the heaviest of the bunch, but heavy nonetheless, it is a monster in a straight line. Now, for pure top-end speed, if you give it longer gears and take it on a track where you can get the speed out of it, such as Route X as a perfect example, the E55 will beat all of the other cars here, only by around 5 or 10 miles per hour, but it will beat them nonetheless. The acceleration is also incredibly good, but like the Jaguar, it's not necessarily the most ideal around twisty tracks. You can feel the weight of the car, it's big, it's heavy, and as fast as it is in a straight line, it can easily be beaten by cars like the BMW M5 around corners. Now, Mercedes aren't necessarily known for their cornering ability, especially the AMG models. They're known as being cars that you can hoon around in. They shred tyres, they have huge torque, huge power, and they're basically, in effect, very American. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I love American cars, and the reason why I say that is because of all the super saloons on the game, the one which is actually the most similar to the Mercedes E55, I would say, is actually the Dodge Charger. It's a very similar feeling and performing machine. Now, overall, all four cars are fantastic, but what about when you actually put them on paper in a top trump style battle? Around the track, the M5 is the quickest, but what about for numbers? Well, as you lay them out on paper and look at all the individual specs of the cars, you start to see that there are certain ways in which particular models outdo each other. Now, all of these cars have very impressive numbers. In particular, with regard to power and torque, they are straight-line missiles. All four of these cars can do around or over 260 miles per hour. They all have great acceleration and can actually outrun cars, sometimes with more power and certainly less weight. As far as prices, they fall in a very similar region to each other. Now, as far as price, the Mercedes actually wins that point, which is kind of ironic given that the Mercedes models on the game are generally known for being pretty expensive, in a similar way to the Aston Martins. But that point is going to the Mercedes E55. Again, as far as engine capacity, the point also goes to the Mercedes by a decent enough margin, not a huge margin. Both the M5 and the Jaguar are both 5 litres to the Mercedes 5.4. So it's not a huge difference, but a difference nonetheless. As far as PP though, it actually swings in favour of the M5, and there's one particular reason why it does so, and this reason is one which I thought may be potentially controversial in my Italian GT Showdown pick, but actually wasn't that controversial at all. And it's actually the same scenario here. In that rivalry, we put 3 Italian GTs head-to-head, and the Maserati Gran Turismo had the advantage of being able to be fitted with a flat floor. And likewise, the premium spec M5, not the non-premium, just the premium model, can also be fitted with a flat floor. Now, in a straight line, that's not a good idea. Flat floors are an awful idea for straight line top end performance because they slow you down. Around the track though, they're a great idea because they give you more downforce, more grip and better handling. In the case of the M5, that flat floor advantage, which is a justified advantage because it's one that's there to use, gives it a massive advantage in sheer PP over all 3 of the other vehicles, giving the BMW M5 the point. As far as sheer power though, the point returns to Mercedes with a significant advantage over the others. It's got a fair bit more power than the Audi, considerably more than the Jaguar, and a whole lot more than the BMW. Now, as far as torque, it also goes to the Mercedes, and that probably isn't too surprising given that AMG models are known typically for having huge amounts of torque, which is another reason why I liken them to American engines. American cars, such as muscle cars, will typically have almost as much torque, if not more torque, than power. and that's often the case with Mercedes AMGs. Here, that's enough to give it the victory, and by a significant margin. In fact, the nearest car of the bunch is the Jaguar, and that's got over 180 pound-feet of torque less. So, not exactly a slim victory. It really easily wins that. And driving the Mercedes, you can feel that torque. It's got that big, lazy, low-end power which just rockets you down the straights and out of corners, but with the payoff being that, of course, it is more prone to eating its own tyres. Now, strangely enough, the next point, which is probably the last point that you'd expect this car to win, it actually goes to the Audi, and that's the weight. The Audi RS6 is ironically the lightest of all four cars. Not by much at all in fact over the BMW, only around 10-11 kilos less, but it's still less, and considering that it has the all-wheel drive that we mentioned earlier, that really is impressive. If the Audi were rear-wheel drive, I think it could well be the quickest of the four. The all-wheel drive really doesn't help the car around this track. So overall, the Audi gets the point for weight. But despite having that point for weight, it's not enough to give the Audi the horsepower per tonne advantage because, again, due to just that sheer power, the Mercedes gets the point at 626 horsepower per tonne. That being said, the Audi is not far behind at 616, and then the M5 comes in at 557, and trailing a little bit behind is the Jaguar, which isn't too surprising given that it is the heaviest of the bunch by quite a big margin. And although, as always, we're not attributing points to the lap times, it is notable that the M5 was the quickest. In second place is the Jaguar, perhaps surprisingly. Then in third is the Mercedes, and last is the Audi. Now, of course, that's based on tuning, track, the driver, etc. So, as always, we don't award that a point. But it is interesting to note that around the track, the BMW really did have the advantage here, and it wasn't a difficult lap to put in at all. And it is also important to note that that lap time was not with the use of the flat floor. So with the flat floor, you could potentially get an even bigger advantage. So around the track, the M5 is the definite choice. But overall, that does mean that purely for on-paper specs, coming in last is the Jaguar with 0 points, which is kind of a shame because it's not a bad car. Then, coming in joint second are the BMW and Audi with 1 point apiece, but coming in first with 5 points, so a pretty significant margin, is actually the Mercedes. And that may surprise some people, but given the massive numbers that the car's got and the fact that it's also the cheapest, it's a pretty great deal. If you're looking purely for straight line performance, I would definitely recommend the Mercedes the most of these four. If though you're looking for track performance, then go for the M5. And as far as the Audi and the Jaguar, well, as I said, they're not bad cars. The Audi is definitely the best of the bunch off-road, and I would probably give the best advantage for drifting to the Jaguar. But overall, they've all got their strengths and disadvantages, and they are all great cars. So that's it overall for this particular Rivals matchup. As always, if there are rivalries that you would like to see, feel free to slap those down in the comments below. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.